Good morning, my friends. Today, we are going to continue our devotion in which we are looking at dealing with the difficulties of life. And specifically, at this point, we're talking about faith in dealing with the difficulties of life. And this is part 2 of a 3-part series in which we are looking at primarily Hebrews 11. And we started this conversation out yesterday, and we're going to continue it today with part 2. So let's jump right into it. Now, basically, what we're talking about and what we focused on yesterday is that life is hills and valleys. There's going to be great and wonderful times in life, and there's also going to be difficult times in life. And so we have to figure out what we want to do in those times of life. Whether we want to deal with those difficulties alone, or whether we want to deal with those difficulties with someone in our life, namely our Creator. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump right into it, and we're going to look at our scripture text. And the scripture text for today is going to be Hebrews 11, and we're going to look at verses 7 through 17. I am not going to share the screen this morning. I am going to be reading the text off of my computer, but because this is recorded, what I found is the screen sharing doesn't work too well when I record. Verse 7, by faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen in holy fear, built an ark to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world and became heir to the righteousness that is in keeping with faith. So we start out by Noah is being faithful about something that he hasn't seen come yet. He knows, because of his faith in God, he knows that this calamity is coming, but he doesn't see it. And when we go back to yesterday, faith, what is faith? In the New King James Version, which is how I memorized it, it's faith is the evidence. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen. He doesn't see this. I mean, he's being told it's going to rain and that the earth is going to be flooded. He takes that to heart. And by faith, what does it tell us? By faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear, he built an ark to save his family. So sometimes in these difficult times, you see things coming. You can look and you know that this difficulty is coming. Not here yet. People around you might say, no, everything's going to be all right. But by faith, we can sometimes prepare for that difficulty, understanding that we're not going to be in this alone. We are in this with God, if we choose to be, because God's not going to leave us. God's not going to walk away from us. What happens is sometimes we choose to walk away from Him. Verse 8, by faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land, like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were his heirs with him in the same promise. For he looked forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. So you have the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And it's telling us that, hey, by faith, they wandered around in the promised land. God has promised them this place. He's promised them a land that they will stay in, but they never lived in the cities of this land. They never lived in the great buildings. They lived in tents. But it was by their faith that even though this difficulty of living in these tents, this difficulty of basically being nomads, never really having a specific and solid place to place their head, they still had faith that, okay, God has made a promise and God is going to fulfill that promise. Verse 11 says to us, and by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was unable to bear children because she considered her faithfulness. Because, let me start that over again. And verse 11, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was unable to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. And of course, that's God. God's the one who made the promise. God promised that she would bear children. Now, let's back up a little bit, because we know that Sarah was faithful in her child, in the fact that, but God's going to provide me with this child. But we also know that two things happened. One, Sarah did have her doubts, because when the angel says she's going to have a child, she laughs. And we know that Sarah also thought that she could help God out with that promise and give her handmaiden to Abraham and have children in that way. So sometimes, especially in difficult situations, in those difficult, hard suffering and times of loss and pain, we try to help God out. We try to get through the situation, maybe not in the way that God wanted us to. And there's often a price to pay for that. The hardest thing about when we're going through times of difficulty in life, when there's suffering, when there's pain, when there's hardship, is that we don't want to be in it. Of course, none of us do. And sometimes we can try and help God out, rush God along. And quite frankly, what ends up happening a lot of times is we can make the situation worse. You just have to trust and be faithful that God will fulfill his promise, that even though we're going through these difficulties, whatever it may be, that God has promised he'll be with us. We don't have to go through it alone. And we can find the great thing about being a follower of God is that even sometimes in those most of difficult times, we can find peace when we are walking with God. So Sarah, yes, she was faithful eventually to the fact that God would provide the child, but she did try and help out initially. So let's move on. Verse 12 says, and so from this one man and his, who was as good as dead because he was old, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sand on the seashore. All these people were still living by faith when they died. This is verse 13. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on the earth. People who say such things, that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of a country they had left, they would have had an opportunity to return instead. They were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. So let's think about what's being said here. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, they all received this promise of these descendants being so numerous as the stars. And they would not see the promise in its fullness fulfilled. That's what we have to understand sometimes, that there are promises that God makes that we may not see in their fullness fulfilled. Maybe it's for the next generation or the following generation. All of us know that we believe that Jesus Christ will return. We don't know when that's going to happen. We know that promise will be fulfilled. Will it be fulfilled in our lifetime? We don't know, but we know that it will happen. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob did not see these numerous descendants, but they knew, they had faith in the promise. But where the greatest faith in the promise comes is that knowing that no matter what we're going through, because when we look at Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, it wasn't just this simple walk through life. Abraham went down into Egypt. Because of the way that he behaved, he had his wife taken from him. He had a daughter who was raped. Isaac, Jacob, we won't even get into all of the things that Jacob goes for. Jacob wants to marry this woman whom he's in love with, and he works for 7 years for her hand in marriage, only to find out that he's tricked and he's married to the older sister, and now has to work for 7 more to get the woman that he truly loves. Time and time again, there is hardship, there is difficulty, there is pain in which people go through. But the one promise that we can take faith in is that God will be with us through it. God does not abandon us. And that, strangely enough, even in difficult times in life, we can find peace in God. So that is part 2 of dealing with the difficulty in life. But we are looking at dealing with that difficulty with faith. So faith when dealing with difficulty in life. It's part 2. I hope that you join me for part 3, the final part of talking about faith on tomorrow. May God bless you.